because people's their mental body, emotional body, and physical body here in the United States, people are suffering greatly. I mean, in the states where we supposedly have like a great medical system, a great healthcare system, and individuals are suffering emotionally and physically at a very, very high level. So I really wanted you to come on so we can discuss some of these wonderful things as to how to handle some of those issues. However, before we get into that, I want people to understand your story, because you came from the experience of body temple being depleted. You came from an experience of bad nutrition, and you overcame all of that to become like fit, vital, and traveling on the world and helping people get back into a level of coherence around their health. So tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. First of all, I just got to thank you, Rev, for having me here. And to be the first podcast, this is really something special. And I would really say that I was a poster child for malnutrition. I grew up in a circumstance where I was doing the math not too long ago. I ate fast food 300 plus days a year. Wow. Without exaggeration. And I thought that was unique. But in reality, about 80 million Americans are getting fast food every day, right? So this is not something that's kind of lost on me. This was a norm in many aspects. And so growing up, eating the way that I was eating, I didn't realize that food is literally making your tissues, right? So every single cell of our bodies is made from the food that we eat. And we have the opportunity to make our body out of high quality things or very low quality things. And we live at a time where just even the last few decades, our definition of food has changed dramatically. We evolved over thousands and upon thousands of years eating real food, things that we can kind of, even if it was processed, you could still tell where it came from, right? If you think about a tomato, for example, right? You can process that and turn it into tomato sauce, right? You can cook it, add a little bit of olive oil, some spices, some more, you can still tell where it comes from, but you have no idea where Lucky Charms come from. There's no resemblance it's not lucky, right? Get Unlucky Charms, right? And so what we identify, we call it food, but it's not really food. And so we're making our bodies out of these things that have never existed before in human history. And so that was the bulk of my diet, growing up. And for me, my way out of the circumstances I was in growing up in, and this, I always hesitate to say this, Rev, because even being in poverty in the United States is very different from many other places in the world.
Right, absolutely.
We still had a TV. Right. We still had a car. My mom literally bought a car from a place called OK Junk Cars, right? So we always had a vehicle. We might have had problems, a lot of issues making the money extend, but we found a way. And living in poverty, we were getting food, food stamps. We were on the WIC program. We would get food from food charities. So like the Hosea House was a place we would get free food. And at Christmas time, they'd give us free gifts. And so, but I'm just taking in what the environment is providing me with. I have no idea that food matters.
Right.
I'm just eating what's presented to me.
Right.
And so fast forward the story, my way out of these circumstances, living in poverty, living right next door to a crack house for a time in my life, one of my most notable times of my childhood. And the only person that I ever met that went to college, well, I didn't actually know him as a friend. He was a relative of a friend, and he went on a athletic scholarship. So I was like, I'm gonna do that. Because this is not going to be my story. I'm not going to grow up in these circumstances. I didn't know how.
Right.
And so, I started to excel in sports. When my friends were out kicking it, I was literally running around my neighborhood. Right. I was finding ways to, get stronger physically and also just pushing myself. So I was getting mentally stronger. And this showed up on the football field. My junior year, I'm going to shorten the story, but I only played 3 games because of injuries, which we're going to get to. Right. I scored 6 touchdowns in those 3 games.
You scored.
Yeah.
That's really something.
On the game film, I have a game film showing me I break away. I think it was a 38 or 39 sweep. I get past the safety. I'm 5 yards from him, and then I snap my hamstring, and I limp my way into the end zone, right? And my body was just falling apart. That was one of many injuries that I experienced because the year prior, my sophomore year, I broke my hip at track practice. Right, so I was running. All I was doing was running. There's no trauma. I didn't fall. Nobody hit me. Just from running, my hip broke because my body was just breaking down and my bones were so brittle. Now, this is where we kind of transition into where we are today. What I experienced at the time was something called standard of care, right? So I come in, I have this injury. They give me an x-ray. They see that my iliac crest, the tip of my bone, is broken off of my hip. And they say, that's interesting. We'll get you some NSAIDs. We'll get you some crutches. You'll heal, right? Or surgery is an option. But nobody stops to ask, how did a kid break his hip? From running, just being a kid.
Right.
And looking at what is the root cause of this particular issue. And so it wasn't until, again, I had about a half a dozen more injuries took place that just diminished my chances of playing at the next level. And I went to college and I was going to, redshirt and come on the football team. The coach invited me out. And I finally get this diagnosis of degenerative bone disease and degenerative disc disease.
And you're a teenager.
This was when I was freshly just turned 20,
right? Is
when I get the diagnosis. And so I'm still a baby in many instances. And, again, I go in to see my physician. I was having some trouble walking. That's what brought me in. And my leg was hurting because I had no connection between my brain and my body and my leg. Right. So I'm just like, why is he telling me to go get an MRI of my spine if my leg hurts? I came in because my leg's hurting, doc. And so he puts the scan up and I see, and by the way, for folks, it's become another epidemic, degenerative disc disease. Many, many people listening have had it, or they have it, or they know someone that has.
Right.
But at the time, a 20-year-old kid, the doctor never seen anything like it.
Right.
And he put the scan up and he said that I had the spine of an 80-year-old man. I had 2 ruptured discs and severe degeneration. My disc, they should light up on a scan. You should be able to see the light glowing through it. They look like little crispy burnt pieces of bologna. All right. Which I'm just giving that analogy because I ate a lot of bologna. All right. And, to this day, I don't know what compelled me to ask him this question. I did have a nutritional science class because I went to college with the intention, okay, I don't get this football scholarship, I'm going to be a doctor because of the Cosby Show. Right.
Yeah.
That was the only reference point that I had
to
seeing somebody, a family that looked like my family. Right. And so even though I hated science, this was the irony. I hated science, but I thought that I should do it. And I also, I got good grades. I got academic scholarship. And so that's what I thought I would do. And I took nutritional science because I thought it was about fitness.
Right.
I thought I could take this class to be more fit. And the teacher is a big auditorium classroom. He was teetering on obesity. He was significantly
He's teaching nutrition.
He's teaching nutrition. So I'm just like cognitively like this guy, it's not that he's not intelligent, but whatever he's going to teach me, he can't teach me to be fit, right? But there's a big difference between fitness and health, which we might be able to circle back to.
Right.
And so, long story short, I had that instance in that nutritional science class, but I was indoctrinated with a lot of false ideas in that class. So maybe that's where I had the audacity to ask this doctor, why did this happen to me, right? So I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? Should I change the way I'm exercising? I'm looking for something proactive because that's what my coaches would give me.
Right.
And he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, I'm sorry, son. This is something that just happens. Right? He said, this has nothing to do with what you're eating. And he was significantly obese. This has nothing to do with what you're eating. This is something that just happens, and I'm sorry that it happened to you. And even though he said this has nothing to do with what I'm eating, what I'm putting in my mouth, he wrote me a prescription to put some drugs in my mouth. Right? At the time, it was Celebrex was hot on the streets. So he gave me a prescription for Celebrex and something else to help me sleep because that was my biggest struggle at the time, and sent me on my way. And over the course of the next 2 years, I went from like a nuisance of a pain to chronic debilitating pain. And I was in a place where it's really hard to explain if no one's ever been through it. Because people say, maybe they have a high pain tolerance or a low pain tolerance. If you have a 10 out of 10 pain, like you'll do anything to get out of it. Right. And so this pain would happen, this sciatic kind of shock would shoot down my leg, 10 out of 10 pain. But it happens just like one split second. But I had to have that happen every time I would stand up to have a normal gait. So I knew it's gonna happen. So I'm like walking very slowly and I'm bracing myself, and then boom, it happens.
Right.
Gut-wrenching pain, and then I could walk normally. So what I did was I stopped getting up. to avoid the pain, I stopped getting up. And so now not only is my spine atrophying, because it's really an advanced arthritic condition, now the rest of me is atrophying because, as you know, the body really works on this use it or lose it basis.
Right.
And so, over the course of these 2 years, now I gain all of this weight because I'm still on my drive-through diet, heavy.
Yeah.
Right?
Drive-through diet.
Yeah. And so I'm just making my body out of these really low quality materials, but everything changed. The thing is, when you decide to change, it's not that the decision happened instantly.
Right.
But the thing is, it takes you enough time, sometimes a long time, to get you to the place where you make the decision.
Right.
And so 2 years pass by. Some people never get it. And this is something I learned from you.
Right.
It doesn't matter how long it's been. Somebody could get it right in that moment. First time, first session, first meditation session.
Right.
Some people can take 50 years.
Right.
Some people can leave here and never really, wake up to their potential. It took me 2 years. And for me, I was a slow student, I felt, because when I made the decision to get well, after I saw my fourth physician who gave me the same bill of goods, this is incurable, here's another prescription. Every time I go and see a new doc, a
new drug.
Same diagnosis, a new drug, right? I realized that I was giving my power away, right? I was giving my potential away to them to tell me what was possible for me. And they didn't walk in my shoes.
Right.
The night that I decided to get well, I had this vision, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I had this vision that the physician I just saw was having dinner with his family. It's past the mashed potatoes. It's a beautiful scene. Everybody's happy and smiling. I don't know what he was really doing. He could have been at the strip club, right? I don't know. But I've envisioned him living his life.
Right.
And not thinking anything about me. And here I am in pain and suffering, and he's telling me that this is going to be my life.
Right.
And so in that moment, I decided to take responsibility for my health.
Yes.
Because that whole time I'd been like, why won't they help me? Why won't he help me? Why did this happen to me?
Right.
And just repeating that on repeat in my mind, right? So, and now I know it's this psychological state called instinctive elaboration. Anything you pose your mind, it's going to search to find the answer.
It's going to find the answer. That's what the mind does.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly asking, why me? Why me? Why me? And looking through this lens of negativity. So I find all these things in the world, internal and external, to affirm why my life is so terrible.
Right.
That's all I could see.
That point right there is very important because people are addicted to finding what they're looking for. And if they're in the constant state of either complaining or constant state of trying to reaffirm why they're feeling the way they are, the universe only shows them that little bit of reality. Even though reality may be infinite, they'll only see and experience what they're looking for consciously or unconsciously. You're describing that perfectly.
Yes.
Continue. Yeah.
And so, when I made this decision to get well, it was very simple. Instead of this, why me, I asked a simple question. I asked, what can I do to feel better? Right? What can I do to feel better?
You changed the question.
Yes. And with that simple question, I'm a very analytical person. I don't know if it's a nature or nurture thing, but I had these skills that I picked up along the way for, research. I was still in college at the time. And also to be able to ask questions, which I'd put on pause when it came to my health.
Right.
Which is so crazy. It was crazy. It's this little pocket of my reality. But also over time, I realized that because of all the struggles I've been through in my life, the circumstances I've been through, how hard everything seemed to have to be, I got permission to quit. I got permission to not fight, right? And nobody would have blamed me. I have this incurable condition. Sean, he's got it bad. It's too bad, right?
Right.
But I knew, and I just had my son Jordan, who he was recently born, and I knew that I wanted to be a model for him.
Right.
I wanted to show him what was possible.
Right.
And within that, so when I changed that question in my head, I put a plan together because it's not just having this insight. There's action attached to it.
Right.
And so my low-hanging fruit was fitness. Being an athlete all those years. So I had relented to do nothing. Now I was just like, I'm doing something. Let me start moving my body, and I was in pain, so I started on a stationary bike. Right. So I just went to the bike at the university, pedaling a little bit. The next week I walked around the track. The next week after that, I picked up a couple of weights, just took one step at a time. And the second thing was, since I gained all this weight, just thinking logically, like I need to get some of this weight off my spine, right? Since it's compressed, my L4, L5 S1 disc, you know, the lower disc. So I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll do Slim Fast, right? So it's because of marketing. It's the low-hanging fruit mentally. I see this thing, a shake for breakfast, one for lunch, and a sensible dinner, right? That lasted for maybe a week, all right? I did lose a couple pounds, but it was disgusting. It was just like, it wasn't in resonance.
Right.
Now, here's where the good stuff really happens. By me asking these questions, what can I do to feel better, and taking steps in that direction, the answers that were there the whole time presented themselves. I had a friend that I would kick it with, and she was in chiropractic school. All right, I know her for years, for like 3 years at this point, and I just thought she was weird. You know, she got her little chiropractic friends, whatever. You know, they all, you know, people adjusting everybody and the whole thing. But she took me to Wild Oats, you know, which has since been bought by Whole Foods.
Right.
And I didn't even know, it was like an entirely different universe.
Right.
I didn't know that kind of place existed.
Right.
Right. And so I walk in, there's like grass on the counter. I'm like,
wheatgrass.
Why is there grass inside? You know? And they had these books, they had these research books there. And there were some peer-reviewed studies on, like, I just went for look for my condition, you know, degenerative disc disease, low bone density. And there were these studies, and there was like talking about all these nutrients that I was not getting on my drive-through diet.
Right.
All I knew about was calcium. And I'm just like, I'm drinking milk, and why are my bones so weak?
Right.
And I find out, like, for example, omega-3s are crucial in the kind of transmutation of minerals like calcium into bone.
Right.
And a recent study actually just came out. I just put this in one of my my newest book, my new manuscript.
Right.
And this study just came out a couple of years ago, finding specifically that the test subjects who had the smallest intake, the lowest intake of omega-3s, had the lowest bone density, specifically in their spine and their hips, where I was struggling.
Right.
Right. So again, it's kind of affirmed over the years what I was experiencing. So omega-3s, silica, sulfur-bearing amino acids, all these things I'd never heard of. The first thing that I did was I became a natural pill popper, right? So I found out about the
eating the natural stuff.
Yes. So I've replaced the
drugs,
the pharmaceutical, the prescription pills with these you know, supplement pills.
Right.
Which that took me only so far. Number one, it was expensive because, you know, being a college student, you know, it's fitting in on the budget. I'm buying all these supplements. Now I've got this pill cabinet. And also because, again, I'm walking in that direction, I realized, what have we been, and I asked a simple question, what have we been doing the longest? I'm deficient in all these things. What have humans done to consume these nutrients the longest? And that's through eating food.
Right.
And so I came across a study on racehorses that affirmed this theory that I was having. And the study had the racehorses, and they gave them, you know, because this is like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right.
For those that know. And if they break a bone, you could lose tens of millions of dollars easily. And so they had a control group of horses, then they had a test group of horses where they gave them supplements like I was taking and increased their bone density. And then they had another group that they walked the horses in addition to that, and they increased their bone density even more. So the movement increased the assimilation of nutrients. And another study found that they compared the consumption of you know, an antioxidant vitamin like vitamin E through a synthetic version versus through a whole food version. And found that the whole food version of that nutrient, the assimilation of the nutrient was twice as high when it was coming from a whole food source. Right.
So you combine that with the movement.
Yes.
And it's amplified.
Exactly. Because that's what exercise is really about. Cognitively in our culture, we attach exercise to sexiness. Like, gonna get the, you know, the
get
flat
the body,
stomach,
flat
you know,
stomach.
get the, you know, today it's about the buns, you know, but it's really, that's a side effect. Exercise, it's a new invention, even the word. Because our ancestors just moved, they just lived. You know, but today we're replicating because we have a very sedentary culture, which is cool. I love it. I love going to the gym. I love working out, the whole thing. But we have to understand what it is. And what exercise really does, biologically speaking, is it is about assimilation of nutrients and elimination of waste, of metabolic waste. Because your lymphatic system doesn't move unless you move. And I didn't know these things, but I was kind of stumbling upon them as I was focused on, again, asking this question, what can I do to feel better? To that question eventually evolved to, how can I be the healthiest person in the world?
Well, here you are today. I mean, you're healthy. So I guess the bones, everything healed.
It was,
So it wasn't incurable.
yeah. Listen, Rev. So 6 weeks after that moment of decision, the pain I'd been experiencing that had me terrified to even move was gone, right? And 9 months later, I went and got a scan done, which I was nervous.
Yeah.
But I knew my life had changed at that point. I was already working with other people and helping other people, being of service. But my 2 herniated discs had retracted on their own, and now the degeneration had reversed to where I could see the light shining through my disc again. And my physician was just,
how long was this?
9 months later.
9 months later.
Yeah. He was just holding his chin, rubbing his chin. He's just like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You know? And he, even looking back on it, he didn't ask me.
He didn't ask you what you were doing.
Yeah.
He was perplexed.
In his mind, again, it's spontaneous remission.
Yeah.
Like this kid.
This is a miracle. It's an accident.
And also I'm young. But I was just told I had the spine of an 80-year-old man.
Right.
Now suddenly my spine is that of someone fit for my age.
Right.
And so, but in that time period, like I said, Rev, people had started coming up to me at the university, asking me what I had done. Because I didn't just look like, and this is another thing, if you lose weight through a conventional method, which is largely ineffective long term,
right,
you can go from, maybe, you're in a state where you're, quote, out of shape, got the apple shape going, not like the Michael Jack, the Coke bottle vibe, but, you can go from that to a smaller apple.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't look like somebody who just lost weight. I looked like somebody who was healthy.
Right. You still do.
Yeah.
You still do. So we have this book, Eat Smarter. And one of the things you talk about, people have a misconstrued idea of calories, in terms of calories and obesity, but you break it down differently. How do you teach that?
Yeah. So because I think we should always question things, and another reason that I love and appreciate you so much is directing people to that. And in that university class, in that nutritional science class that I paid good money for, Rev, it was expensive private university.
Right.
I was taught the first day that if you can control calories, then you can control your health.
Right.
If you can control calories, you can control your weight.
Right.
It's very simple paradigm of, calories in, calories out. If you want to lose weight, you expend more caloric energy than you take in.
Right.
Right?
It sounds logical.
Sounds very logical, but here's the thing. The human body is not a calculator. It's more like a very complex chemistry set or chemistry lab. There's so much going on, and not even to bring in the mind into the equation, which we'll talk about later. Our metabolism, the human metabolism, is unique to each and every person. You have a unique metabolic fingerprint that's not like anyone else on the planet or who's ever existed before us.
Right.
We have these simplifications that we love. And so in studying calories and looking into where did this dogma come from, because tens of millions of people right now in the United States alone are on calorie restricted diets, probably way more than that, that are eventually going to fail.
Right.
And a dogmatic trainer like I used to be, strength and conditioning coach, nutritionist, is going to be like, you're just not doing it right.
Right.
You're
taking in too many calories or something to that effect. Yeah.
And so we got to find that sweet spot for you with calorie restriction, right? People post even to this day. Somebody's posting, they're struggling, they've tried so much, they've cutting their calories now. This is a grown woman. We'll just say she's 5'8", and she's 190 pounds, and she's consuming 900 calories a day at this point. And the weight is just not budging. And sure enough, some expert, some nutrition expert is going to say, have you tried calorie restriction? Like they're just going to throw that out there. And not understanding that there are epicaloric controllers, right? So epi meaning above, caloric control, that control what calories do in your body. Just to give you an example, and this ties in together what I was eating, processed foods, heavily ultra processed foods, by the way. Right now, here in the United States, 60% of the average American's diet is made of ultra processed foods. So turning back to those Lucky Charms.
It's not even real food.
Not real food.
The body doesn't even recognize it as food.
So what happens when you do that calorie restriction with those kind of foods, because it's on your point system, right? And so this study is published in the journal Food and Nutrition Research. They want to find out what would happen with caloric expenditure when someone eats a meal of processed foods versus a meal of whole foods, all right? So this is this saying that people have now, not all calories are created equal.
Yes.
Now we have the science on this. So the whole food sandwich was multi-grain bread, whole grain bread, and cheddar cheese, all right? It's debatable how good it is,
Right,
but
right.
we're not getting into that.
Right.
But this was the ingredients for that cheddar cheese is like 4 things. Okay, the whole grain bread, a couple of ingredients. You could still tell that it came from some grains.
Right, right.
Versus a meal of a processed food sandwich, which was white bread and cheese product. And if you're wondering what cheese product is, that's Kraft Singles.
Yeah.
They can't legally call it Kraft cheese.
Right, they have to
because
call it Kraft cheese product.
Yeah, it needs to be 51% or more cheese in the cheese.
Right,
but
right.
they don't have enough cheese in the cheese, right? So they
Not
have
enough cheese in the cheese.
they have the test subjects to consume these different sandwiches. Now, here's the most important part. The sandwiches are the same amount of calories, the same amount of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. On paper, it should have the same impact on the body. But when the test subjects consumed the processed food sandwich, they had a 50% reduction in calorie burn after eating that sandwich versus the real food sandwich. Their bodies, their metabolism, their metabolic rate slowed down. It created this hormonal clog to where their system was not processing and expending this energy. It made their cells stingy in hanging on to that processed garbage. All right? This is not accounted for when we have this calories in, calories out paradigm. And in Eat Smarter, I actually went back to the root of calories. Like, where did this concept come from that's dominated our culture that hasn't worked?
Right.
Not to say that it hasn't worked for some people, and calories have their place.
Right.
But it's not the king.
Right.
It's not the monarch. It's not the emperor
Right.
of nutrition. As we are inundated, I was indoctrinated through my expensive education to tell people that if you control these calories, you can control
You can
your
lose
health.
weight. Right.
All right.
Right.
And so it actually, the origin of it dates back to 1800s and in the realm of physics. This had nothing to do with nutrition. That was brought in a little bit later. You know, we can look at people like Atwater. We can look at Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters, who really popularized the concept of the calorie as far as nutrition is concerned. She had a nutritional bestseller in the earlier part of the 1900s, and she sold like 2 million copies, which is basically, she was like Drake.
Right.
There, you know what I mean?
Back
Like,
in the day, 2 million. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous now, but you're talking about the turn of the century.
yes.
That's
So everybody, and in that book, she shifted the mental perception of food from being this incredible, highly complex substance, which even if you take, for example, an avocado, when you eat that avocado, you're not just eating the avocado, you're eating that avocado's microbiome,
yes.
right? So that's just one layer of complexity that people don't think about.
Right.
So taking it from being food to being calories. She
Right.
said you will no longer eat a slice of bread, you'll eat 100 calories of bread. You'll no longer eat a slice of pie, you'll eat 350 calories of pie. It's turning food into numbers instead of this substance that literally makes up who we are.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. So that
And so-
dominated the culture and the
Yes,
perception.
that's when it all happened.
Yeah.
And also in that book, this is when we began to popularize the idea of tying food to morality. Right? So your food choices determine what kind of character you have, right? If you're a bad person, you eat bad food, right? If you eat something, you cheat on your meal, you have your cheat meal.
Right. Right.
What does that say about your character? You're a cheater,
Right. Right.
right? So it starts tying these things. And also this was wartime.
Right.
So, food rationing was going on. And so she was imploring people to strive for hunger. If you diet and you feel hungry, that's when you know it's working,
Right.
right? So another popularized idea that has no weight in science.
Right.
Right? So you should look for the suffering in order to get where you want to go.
Wow.
Right? And so, these are the ideas that get pushed into culture. And the last thing I'm going to share with this with the calories. So there are many caloric controllers. And this can even segue into understanding the brain.
Yeah.
Your brain is the governor, really, in determining whether or not or how much calories you are assimilating from the diet, from the food that you just ate, okay? So I'll give you an example. Researchers at Yale University, they found that the vagus nerve, connecting the brain, the gut, that this kind of super highway of information is constantly feeding back and forth data. And your brain, based on its assessment and the data that's coming from via the vagus nerve, your brain can tell your gut to decrease or increase the assimilation of calories from that meal you're eating, and decrease or increase the assimilation of key nutrients based on your brain's perception of what you have stored.
Right.
So if somebody's in a state of obesity, why on earth would their brain still be telling their gut to assimilate a great deal of those calories instead of ratcheting it down.
Right.
And this ties into work, and this was coming from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. They found that the biggest, from these scientists' perspective, hidden epidemic happening right now is something called neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain.
Right.
And they said that neuroinflammation is really a double-edged sword for nutritional diseases. They found that inflammation happening in the brain is creating more visceral fat, more obesity and insulin resistance because of inflammation in the brain. And insulin resistance and obesity is creating inflammation in the brain. So it's a vicious circle. So one is creating the other is creating the other.
So the brain's not operating properly.
Exactly.
So it's not sending the right information for the body to do the proper thing.
Exactly.
So I want you to talk about two other things then. One, the gut and the bacteria of the gut creating that healthy, biome nature, that's an epidemic as well. Yeah.
So
and then the psychology also of the brain. What kind of nutrition should we be taking to make sure that inflammation goes down? Yeah.
So it's not just our brain, it's the brain of our microbes.
Right.
So the estimate that we have right now, maybe 30, 40,000 human cells. We have 4 to 10 times more bacteria cells in and on our bodies. Right? We're teeming with bacteria.
Right.
If we go gene for gene, 99+% of the genes that we carry are not human. They're our bacteria genes. And so they also, again, they have their own goals, their own, ambitions, their own fears and things like that. Now, of course, I'm personifying the bacteria.
Right.
But all of this is supposed to work together in synergy, right, for the greater good of the entity. But when things get out of balance, negative things can happen. And so, being from St. Louis, some researchers there, WashU is doing great work, as well as St. Louis University. But the greatest database of twins studies, identical twins, bared out something really interesting when it comes to our microbes and our body fat. And they found that identical twins in the same household, eating the same diet, same practices, if one twin has a microbiome that is distorted, so a definition is kind of dysbiosis, where they have more microbes that are associated with obesity and insulin resistance. So this category of firmicutes, for example, we have firmicutes and bacteroidetes. These are very broad definitions or categories of microbes. But if one twin has more firmicutes, they tended to, even though they're eating the same food, have higher rates of insulin resistance and higher rates of obesity, even though they're identical because they have different microbes. All right?
They're eating the same food and they're in the same environment.
Yes.
But they're different.
Yes, and this goes into those conversations, things that we ignore in our culture, where we have friends who could eat, you could eat the same diet as your friend.
Right.
And one of you gets thicker while the other one, stays relatively slim, eating the same diet, right? We see this all the time. You could see, the skinny friend, right, who's eating this way, drinking whatever, and they don't seem to really gain weight.
Right.
Each person has a unique metabolic fingerprint that includes that unique microbial fingerprint. Right. So your microbes have a huge influence on your assimilation and processing of the nutrients you're taking and the calories you're taking in. So our microbiome is another epicaloric controller that I damn sure was not taught about in my university class. Again, it was very superficial. And so we need to eliminate the dogma, eliminate the victim blaming when it comes to weight loss. I've worked in this field for 20 years. Next month is my 20th anniversary in this field.
Wow.
All right. You're going to hit me with the wow like it's a long time, Rev.
Well, it is a long time based on everything you've come from.
Yeah.
And where you are today.
Yeah.
So you 20 years, that means you've done more research and more investigation and using yourself as a research project yourself. You have more than 20 years of information and knowledge because you've actually practiced what you've learned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ferociously.
Yeah.
And the biggest gift again is being able to package this up in a way that makes sense for people.
Right.
Because we have this tendency in our culture to, again, victim blame and to put into this psychological pocket that our university education is the end-all be-all.
Right.
And oftentimes we don't really realize, even my nutrition program at that university is getting funded from General Mills.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's just like, what else are they going to tell you to eat
Right.
than their products?
Right.
How on earth could their products be unhelpful?
Right.
You know, and then again, even to this day, you go and look at some of the marketing on some of these cereal boxes, and it's heart healthy.
Right.
You know, made with healthy whole grains and all
Right.
these things. And it's just,
It has a whole lot of sugar in it.
yeah, it's insane. It's not even real food.
Right.
Not to say that you can't have your bowl of cereal, but
Right.
just realize what it is.
Right.
And make that the minority of your diet, you know, the
Right.
exception, not the rule. For
Right.
many people today, including myself, it was the rule.